Uisla, Gael, members and supporters of the National Party. This is probably one of the most difficult broadcasts that I've ever had to make, because it involves a deep and cutting betrayal by people who were very close to me. One of them in particular, James Reynolds, I've known for over 30 years, and I trusted him completely. Some others I have known for the 7 years that the National Party has been in existence, and I trusted them completely too. And what is worse, and what is embarrassing, and what I have to apologise for, is that as leader of this party, as Ceannaire, I have asked you to trust those people too, and I have been wrong in that. I have been so very wrong in believing that these people were honest and trustworthy, and I placed them in positions that they should never have been in. I do not address myself tonight to left-wingers or to sit on the fence right-wingers or to the social commentators on politics. Those people who are either always laughing, always whinging, or always complaining, but never actually doing except damage. I address myself entirely to the membership and supporters of the National Party. Your opinion is the only opinion which I care about. Your opinion on my actions, your opinion on the events that have taken place, is the only opinion that actually affects the future of this party and therefore, consequently, the future of this country. Now, there have been many accusations made against me, and I am not in a position to answer all of them. Some of them are so ridiculous that they would demean both me and you for me to even attempt to answer them. But there are two that are particularly striking. One of them is this. It's striking because it is believable to some people. One is that and I use the phrase, doxed Paul Conroy. That his political activism was entirely unknown until I put his name in the public domain. That is simply not true. The fact of the matter is that Paul Conroy's name has been in the public domain for many, many years and is known to every extremist left-wing group and presumably to every dissident right-wing group as well. And so to accuse me of doxing him is, as I said, simply not true. It is also absurd that somebody should take a position as high as a national organiser in a registered political party and expect to remain anonymous. That they should expect that other people would put their names on posters and leaflets and have the courage to go before election, and that they would be allowed to remain anonymous. It's an anonymity that he didn't have anyway. But to even pretend that he had it is foolish, because he has time and time again complained that he has been doxed before, and about the people who have done so. It would also be absurd if the crime of doxing were to be considered more serious than a criminal offence of stealing the funds of the political party that you were working for and with. So, number one, Mr. Conroy was not anonymous when I put his name in the public domain. It was already there. Number two, the national organiser of a political party has no right to anonymity. Number three, a criminal, a thief, has no right to anonymity under any circumstances. The second relates to Garda Síochána and why I involved them in this entire affair, and why I didn't keep it in-house and keep it just among National Party people. I did so with the utmost of reluctance. When I discovered that the gold reserves of the National Party, which is paid for by collections made and donations from yourselves, when I discovered that that had been taken, then I discovered who had taken it, that they had in fact engaged in a criminal act, my first action was not actually to ring on Garda Síochána. No, I rang James Reynolds 19 times and I texted him just about as many. I rang Paul Conroy 3 times, and again I made every effort to contact them before I contacted on Garda Síochána. But at the end of the day, what was I expected to do? Was I expected to really just let them get away with it? We know that the Garda Síochána of Commissioner Drew Harris is not politically neutral. We know that they are opposed to us on many levels. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's something they have said openly, that they're engaged in political policing. But the fact of the matter is that faced with the ordinary guard in the street, I don't believe that anybody thinks that absolutely every one of them are corrupt. And I don't believe that anyone in this audience tonight would take the view that if they were assaulted in the street, or if they had their property stolen, or if some harm came to a member of their family, that they would not ring the guards on the basis that Drew Harris was the commissioner. Even during the War of Independence, there were Republican courts set up throughout this country to ensure that if the IRA at the time was going to ask people not to report crimes to the RIC, that they certainly had to present them with some parallel alternative. There had to be law and order. There has to be somebody you can go to with a real crime. Now I am assuming that on Garda Síochána and the guards directly involved in this case will act in a non-political and a non-corrupt manner. But I ask you above all else, what choice did Mr. Reynolds and what choice did Mr. Conroy give me? How was this supposed to remain outside of the public domain? Now the origins of the dispute that led to this division within the National Party are very difficult to discern. The truth is probably known to almost nobody, because the truth is that everybody had different motives and were acting under different moral principles. But the origins of the dispute seems, as near as I can make out, to be the increasingly erratic behaviour of the national organiser over the past year or so. So erratic was that behaviour that it was noticed not just by myself, but by everyone else in the activist sections of the National Party. Now some of those sections have taken his side in the coup attempt that has been made against the legitimate leadership of the National Party, and I do not understand that under the circumstances in which many of these people came to me and said, look, here is Paul's behaviour, it's unconscionable, we cannot carry on this way, it cannot be allowed. In fact, there was a meeting on Saturday the 24th of June 2023 at which it was discussed the erratic behaviour of the national organiser, and it was agreed to give him the benefit of the doubt that the reason why his behaviour was so erratic was that he was under too much work pressure. Certainly that's one of the things that he had complained to me of. And it was decided at that meeting, which Mr. James Reynolds was present at, among other people who are involved in the coup now, that Mr. Conroy's behaviour was indeed erratic and that something needed to be done about it. And given his believed loyalty over the past 7 years, we wanted to do it in a way that didn't humiliate or didn't degrade him in any way, but some of the burden of the office of national organiser he certainly wasn't capable of carrying out, and therefore would have to be taken off him. In particular, a decision was made at that meeting that the passwords and control of all of the social media of the National Party could no longer be in the hands of one single person, that it could no longer be run efficiently that way, and that it was also dangerous that anybody other than the leader himself should have so much control. And indeed, as subsequent events have shown us, that is exactly what has occurred, is that somebody with this much power, with this much access to social media, does have a controlling influence far beyond the support they have within the actual party itself. But what brought things to a head was that while attempts were being made to get certain passwords and certain access to social media from the national organiser on a voluntary basis, he decided, first of all, to be obstinate about that and delay it. And second of all, in the run-up to the pro-life rally on the 1st of June 2023, I asked him and others to bring banners and flags to the rally to represent the National Party in a very public way. Mr. Conroy blankly refused. He said that we had conservative friends that we would lose if we were so openly National Party, and that we should instead try to fly as much as we could under the radar and just be part of the group. This was despite the fact that several politicians of other political parties were actually represented on the podium. This was in spite of the fact that AIM2 in particular was endorsed by the organisers of the rally, and that they had their banners at the rally, as they were indeed entitled to do. But our national organiser thought better of it, and he damn well simply refused to obey the order he was given to bring the flags and the banners that he had. It was clear to me that the national organiser could no longer remain in his position in any way, shape or form. And so on the Sunday after the Saturday of the rally, that is the 2nd of July, I dismissed Paul Conroy as the national organiser. He didn't say very much about it and hung up quite quickly. So I didn't think much more about it either, except the practicalities of how we were now going to get control of the social media that I spoke of, and the problem that we currently have now, that we don't have it either. Such a simple task, for example, as getting my own camera back. He had acquired it at the pro-life rally, he had it in his possession, and I was not in speaking terms with it. So through an intermediary, I made an effort to get that back, and indeed I did get that back, but the behaviour of the intermediary in question was so very suspicious when they gave me the camera that it made me think that there is something afoot. This was Friday the 21st of July 2023. So suspicious was that person's behaviour that although I had asked Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Conroy to remove their personal gold from the party vault already, I was suspicious that they might have done something more. So I rang the vaults and asked them, had anybody tried to access the party box in the last few days? And they told me that yes, there had been, access to the party box on Tuesday, the 18th of July 2023. My suspicions already aroused, I still had the hope that they had simply removed what belonged to them and that the party's gold reserves would be there. But I made the trip nonetheless to Dublin, Friday the 21st, as I said. And when I opened the vault box, it was completely empty, which takes us back to the 19 calls, etc., etc. I called on Garda Síochána, they came, they took a statement. The following day they received a seizure warrant for 3 boxes within the vault. Now, if you know how a seizure warrant is acquired, you'll know that you have to show the judge a probable cause that a crime has been committed in order to get one. Even though the newspaper subsequently said the gold was simply handed back. This is the origin of the 400,000 amount, 400,000 euro in gold. The National Party's quantity of that is a tiny, tiny fraction. And indeed, at no time did the National Party's vault box contain anything like 400,000 euro in gold, including Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Conroy, although they may have had their own personal gold in other boxes, and I am going to make the assumption that they did, and also that that was legally acquired, but that's not for me to say. All I know is that the National Party's gold, which is the gold which I was responsible for, was gone. That night, I offered Paul Conroy not to pursue a criminal investigation and not to pursue a criminal prosecution if everything was returned. Now, when I say everything was returned, of course I meant the gold reserves, but I also meant all of the property of the party, which is to say control of social media, flags and banners, and other items which he as the national organiser had in his custody, but were in fact the property of the party, and since he was now the ex-national organiser, he should hand them over. But I received no response. Again, I made an open offer to keep this under wraps, but that offer was rejected by silence. It was also rejected by Mr. James Reynolds, who clearly also did not want to have any contact with me. So, having no other choice, on Sunday the 23rd of July 2023, I expelled Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Conroy from the National Party. I made that as a public statement and made it through the only social media that I had available to me at the time, which was a Twitter account of the Dublin Bay South campaign, where I had been a candidate earlier in time. And of course, it went very public. Almost every newspaper carried it. Now, they didn't carry it truthfully, but they carried it nonetheless, that a vast quantity of gold I had accused people of having stolen from the party, and that an investigation into who owned the gold was going on. But they said there was no criminal investigation. Well, of course there was no criminal investigation, because at that time I had not made a criminal complaint. And the newspapers are being very technical when they say there was no criminal investigation, because from the following Saturday, when I did make a formal complaint to Garda Síochána, a formal criminal complaint, there was a criminal investigation, and nobody has corrected the record on that. I gave a full statement to Garda Síochána on that Saturday, and now I knew there was no going back. And getting the social media back well, court is very expensive and it's not to be resorted to lightly. So, once again, my actions were reluctant. But they were firm, and they were decisive, and they were above all else, they were in your best interests, and they were in the party's best interests. Then came an event that I can only describe as absolutely bizarre. On July the 31st, there was an announcement throughout the National Party social media, controlled by Mr. Conroy and controlled by Mr. Reynolds, where they made an announcement of 7 sentences long, 7 sentences only, in which they stated that I had been dismissed from the leadership of the National Party at a meeting in mid-July, and that Mr. Reynolds had been elected at that meeting in mid-July. Now, from the time that I expelled Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Conroy on the 23rd and the 31st of July, you'll note 8 days have passed. So 8 days after the so-called ex-leader has expelled you from the party, you declare that in mid-July, and you're not quite sure what day in July because you haven't even in the 8 days made up your mind exactly what date you're going to go for, you claim that in fact he was the one who was dismissed. In fact, you, James Reynolds, were now the party leader, and therefore you had every right to do whatever you wanted with the party's resources. This idea, and that they even couldn't settle on a date, was so bizarre. Now imagine the story if it was true. You're elected leader in mid-July. You don't make any announcement of that fact. You're expelled very publicly by the now ex-leader on the 23rd. 8 days later, you announce that you in fact were the leader all along. Is that believable to you? Because that's what you have to believe in order to believe that James Reynolds is the leader of the National Party. Because that's what the announcement said. Mid-July. The announcement was accompanied by, and I quote, "A full statement will be forthcoming at a later time." July the 31st, 2023. We are now September the 4th, and there still has been no statement whatsoever. Party members haven't been told the date in July at which I was supposedly dismissed, or that Mr. Reynolds was elected. They haven't been told who was at that meeting. They haven't been told by whom I was dismissed, or how I was dismissed, or how Mr. Reynolds was elected. They haven't been told under what authority the people who were at that meeting should make such a decision. This nameless, faceless, dateless election took place. To this day, I have not been informed by anyone that I am not the continuing leader of the National Party by phone, text, email, or in person. I have only read an announcement in social media and various announcements of events that occurred afterwards which imply that I am no longer the leader and imply that Mr. Reynolds is the leader, but no explanation at all. Again, is all this believable to you? In quick summary, I want to draw attention to this document. the constitution of the National Party. Now this was certainly in Mr. Reynolds' possession at some point, for he signed it before it was delivered to the Electoral Commission in 2016, and he is bound by it by law. And I want to draw attention to a number of things. The first is that the party shall be administered by a national directorate. The leader of the party shall hold the title of president. Any amendments to or alterations to the constitution shall be made by a majority vote of the national directorate. And a second section. The National Directorate shall be elected by the annual general meeting of the party from the candidates present, by a majority of the members present. Any person who is a member in good standing may be a candidate for a position on the National Directorate. Now, the only annual general meeting at which a vote took place for the National Directorate was one at which I was elected to the National Directorate and Mr. Reynolds was elected to the National Directorate, and I was chosen to be president and leader and Ceannaire, and he was chosen to be vice president, deputy leader, or last Ceannaire. Now let me draw your attention to the powers which the president has, given that that's the office I held. The president is authorised and responsible for in consultation with the National Directorate. Number two, because there's a lot of them. Number two, the dismissal, as I did, of Mr. Reynolds, the dismissal without restriction of members of the National Directorate. That is the constitution of the party. Against this written constitution, against the annual general meeting, which was attended by several hundred people, we have an anonymous meeting in mid-July, and we have a series of social media posts. That, my friends, my supporters, members of the National Party, is not good enough for you. It is not good enough for me. It is not good enough for anybody. There are only two officers of the National Party who were ever elected. And why do you say there was only two officers of the National Party elected? Well, because we wanted to protect the organisation from precisely the kind of infiltration which took place anyway. And I had known Mr. Reynolds for over 30 years, and I trusted him absolutely. And I presume he trusted me absolutely. And there is no way this coup could have taken place. There's no way that they could have even pretended that it had taken place, unless they had the support, number one, of the person who had control of social media, Mr. Paul Conroy, and number two, Mr. James Reynolds, who is the only other officer whose name was officially registered with the Electoral Commission. The meeting in mid-July did not take place. It could not take place. The date is plucked out of mid-air. It has to be a date before July the 18th, when they stole the gold. It really is that simple. Now forward from that, we have the NP social media used to foster the myth. Photo shoots without words, except Mr. Reynolds is doing interviews with the Sunday Independent, where he talks about a more rural party, and radio interviews in which he talks about our international obligations to the Ukrainians in particular. Moving the party to the centre. Moving the party not away from the far right, but away from anywhere that might closely resemble anything that might be described as right-wing. So there you have it. the whole unvarnished truth as I know it. I don't know what other people involved in the coup are thinking. I don't know the lies they have been told. I don't know how many of them believe the lies they have been told. But there are clearly some who know that they are lies and are going along with them anyway. And that, to me, is shocking. Because it means that we are going to have to rebuild the party from the ground up. And that's going to be a very difficult task at the best of times. But these are not the best of times, because the bank has frozen, Bank of Ireland has frozen the party's main account, while the, as they quote, the dispute is settled. Meanwhile, and even more dangerously, the Electoral Commission, whom I contacted on the 28th of July, properly so, under Section 47, to amend the officer board. The 28th of July, they got back to me on the 24th of August. And this is what they had to say. Now remember, I contacted the Electoral Commission 3 days before the coup was announced. So there was no conflict between the officers of the National Party at that time as to what had taken place. They had the word of the president of the party that Mr. Reynolds was no longer an officer of the party, and that was the end of the matter, one would think. Really? And this is where it gets really, really bad. Because the registrar has decided that he cannot reconcile the point of view that has been put forward by Mr. Reynolds or the point of view that has been put forward by myself. They have not chosen, for example, to use what is believable and what is not believable. But here's where the real problem comes. Because they have said that if there is not a reconciliation, in other words, if there is not a clear answer as to who is in control of the party, and I believe that the clear answer is already with them in the Constitution, but they say it isn't clear. And if it isn't clear, they say they will not amend Section 47 of the Act, but will move instead as to whether they should in fact use the provisions of Section 56 and 57 of the Act, which is to say to deregister the National Party altogether. This is the absolute disaster that Mr. Reynolds' so-called leadership has brought us to in such a short space of time, even though the entire thing is going on only in his own head. Even imagination, it seems, can be very dangerous when you have people like the Electoral Commission politically motivated to use this as an opportunity to remove an enemy of the political establishment as they see it. Now, I don't think there is one single person in this country, and I don't think there is one single person in this political party that believes that Mr. Reynolds, above all people, whatever you think about me, is capable of leading this party, or is capable of leading any party. But he is being used by the Electoral Commission, and God knows he is being used by certain elements within the National Party, who, if we stay on the course we are on, will lead to the complete and absolute destruction of the party through its deregistration. I would appeal to Mr. Conroy, and I would appeal to Mr. Reynolds, probably quite pointlessly, to withdraw this nonsense, this fantasy story which you have put forward, and to admit that you in fact never believed that you had the authority to remove the goal, that there was never a dismissal of myself as a party leader, that Mr. Reynolds was elected by nobody, that if he has some support in the party, it is support based on not liking me rather than believing in him, and that we can still turn this thing around. Now I make that appeal rather pointlessly. So I make this appeal to you. And I don't like doing it. But it is a fact that you cannot run a political party, and I am still in control of the vast majority of the political party itself on the ground. You cannot run a political party without money. And without money we most certainly are. Every penny that goes through the website of the National Party or is sent to the address that the National Party gives on its social media ends up in the hands of the conspirators. So I have decided, as a beginning, to a fight back, to take control of our party, that I will set up a give, send, go crowdfunding appeal to try and raise the kind of money that we will need in order, in the first instance, to keep the party functioning as it ought to do outside of the areas that the coup controls. And second of all, that we can take the necessary legal action to reacquire control until, as the phrase I have used time and time again, is that order will be restored. I have no one else to turn to than you, the members and supporters of the National Party, to understand that with all my faults and with all my failings, and God knows I'm aware of them, that at this particular moment in Irish history, I am the only person who is capable of leading the National Party, and that the National Party is the only party which is capable of leading Ireland out of the mess that it has gotten itself into and been gotten into by a traitorous government. Our party has been betrayed from within, our country has been betrayed from within, and I want to appeal to people of courage, determination, and generosity. On a previous occasion, I was removed from my activities in the pro-life movement because the ideas that I was putting forward were not in line with the leadership's ideas at the time as to how to go forward. And they were the legitimate leadership, so I walked away. The result, though it took many years to actually come about, the result was the exact disaster that I had predicted. The whole-scale murder of Irish unborn children by a repeal of the 8th Amendment, and the abortion doctors got to work. Now, the very existence of the Irish people, the very existence of the Irish nation is at stake. And there are people within the party, like Mr. Reynolds and like Mr. Conroy, who have no legitimate authority whatsoever, who are saying to me, Justin, walk away. Your life will be a lot easier, and we will carry on, albeit we're already making a mess of it. but we will carry on without you. Just walk away. I walked away the last time, and the babies died. I will not walk away again, and I need your support.